Have you ever wondered if it was possible or tried to add an ABC analysis to your embedded SAC stories but didn't quite know where to start? Well, stick around and find out. Welcome back to the channel. In SAP S/4HANA Cloud, there are of course many apps where the ability to perform an ABC analysis is baked right into the application. But sometimes you might find it useful to add an ABC analysis to an embedded SAC story that you are working on. And this is exactly what we are going to cover today. The ABC analysis serves as an economical analysis procedure. Part of the analysis is evaluating and categorizing products, customers, tasks, anything really, into classes. Classes A for high priority, B for medium priority, and C for low priority. In particular, in the area of supply chain and inventory management, the ABC analysis finds frequent use. The ABC analysis is based on the Pareto principle, or you might have often heard the 80-20 rule, which is a term that was coined by the management consultant Joseph Durand and named after Vilfredo Pareto, an Italian engineer who at the time noted that 80% of Italy's land belonged to 20% of the population. Simply put, the focus should be on what is most important. As we kick off a wider series on material planning techniques, we will apply this principle to a hypothetical use case that we will be looking at today, where we will try to determine which 20% of the items we sell contribute to 80% of our revenue. Therefore, it is important to focus on how these items are going to be planned, because if they are so important to my top line, then I certainly do not want to be out of stock when my customer orders start to come through. This in turn means that this will help me decide how I plan my materials. Now, whilst we will use a specific use case to demonstrate how you can add an ABC analysis in an embedded SAC story, you could use this to any use case really. Your top 20% customers, your top 20% contracts. It really is up to you to be creative. So as usual, let's cover what we are trying to achieve and then jump in the system to set it up. So before we jump into the system, as usual, let's look at the problem statement before us from a theoretical point of view so that we can understand what we will need to do in the system once we get to it. Before us, we have a completed ABC analysis, and it's going to help us to highlight and understand what information will be available in SAP S/4HANA Cloud for us to work with, and what information it is that we will need to add to our report in order to actually produce this ABC analysis report. So shown with a beige background, columns B and C show the data that will be available in SAP S/4HANA Cloud for us to work with. Now I will choose a CDS that gives us invoiced sales, invoiced information, and the information we'll have will be in column B the product, the material codes if you like, that we sold and invoiced to our customers, and in column C we will have the corresponding invoiced amount for the sale of that particular item. Now note that in this particular report that we have before us, we do not have any reference to period. So we don't know here, by looking at the data, if this information is relevant or pertains to the last day, the last week, the last month, the last 12 months. We don't know. And this is omitted on purpose. We do not want to have the data by a broken down period, if you like. We want an aggregated value for the period that we are analyzing. This means that whilst we are not seeing the period as a parameter in this report, it definitely has to be a parameter that is going to influence the selection of the data. Because of course, it could be that you don't want to look at data that is 24 months old because it simply isn't relevant anymore. And you want to have this analysis to run on a rolling 12 months, for example. So again, this highlights the importance of being able to provide a period as a selection parameter, but definitely not as a visible report piece of information. So these two columns really show the information available in SAP S/4HANA Cloud for us to work with. All of the other pieces of information that we see on the screen are information that we are going to have to add to be able to create this ABC report. And the first piece of information that we are going to need is the total revenue. So in this case, the total revenue is the sum of the individual items that were invoiced to my customers over my chosen period. And the reason why we need this is because we need to be able to understand what this particular value represents in relation to the total amount. And in this case, as we can see here in column E, we know that this $515 represents 13% of the total amount that was invoiced to my customers. So the total amount is the first piece of information that we will need, and we'll need that to be able to compare the apportionment of each individual line in our report with regards to the total amount. In column E, what we'll then also need is a running cumulative percentage revenue. So we can see here, as I said before, that this first line represents 13%. Then the addition of these two lines represents 26%. The addition of these three lines represents 38%, and so on and so forth until we reach 100%. Now, the reason why we need this cumulative percentage revenue is because, as you can see here, we've established that our ABC classification is going to be based on Class A materials, will be those materials that represent 15% of my revenue. The B class items will be those items that represent 40% of my total revenue, and the C items will be the rest. Here in this particular table, we have preset a default value of Class A items to be 15%. And we can see that the first line is the only item that fulfills this particular criteria of 15%. Because if we look at the second item, we can see that we are already jumping to 26%. So let's see if we were to, for example, change the B items and say that that is going to be the materials that represent 80% of my revenue. Oops. So we can see that the B class items has been extended to now include all of the items up to 80%. We can then also, for example, change the Class A items and say that they will represent up to 40% of my revenue. So I hit 40, enter, and again we can see that our ABC analysis has dynamically changed to expand to an additional two materials. So those three items here represent up to 40% of my total revenue. These are of course then the most important materials that I need to work with, that I need to plan correctly and accurately and make sure that I always have in stock so that I can successfully service my customers when the sales orders come in. So now that we have kind of set the scene for what we need to do, let's just jump into the system and get going. Alright, so now that we are in the system, there is a couple of ways that you could start this off. Either you need to create your own custom analytical query, because potentially the data source is going to be a mashup of different CDSs where you want to look at historical as well as future data, for example. So managing the marriage of historical sales with forecast data. It could also be that you just want to create a custom analytical query that is a copy of a standard one, but with a much reduced number of fields. Or you can obviously start your analysis by leveraging directly an existing analytical query that is in the system. So if you are going to create your own custom analytical queries, then you obviously would need to use the app custom analytical queries, and potentially even before that have created your own custom CDSs. In our case, we'll go straight to the Manage KPI and Reports app, and we'll create directly an embedded SAC story by leveraging an existing SAP query. So we'll call this Sales ABC Analysis, and in configuration is where we will need to reference our data source, and as I said, we will use an existing SAP standard data source. So it means that obviously there'll be quite a few fields that I don't need, but that's okay. This is just for demonstration purposes. So the data source that I'll be using will be this one here, revenue from invoice query. So this is actual sales that have been invoiced, and that will be my data source. And what I'm going to do is define the US dollar as my currency. I will also indicate the sales organization 1710 as the one that I work with. So I'm going to set those as default in my story. Now I want to give as much real estate to my report as possible. So I'm going to remove one swim lane and add a data table in the lane that I have kept. So already we can see it's being populated with data. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove some of those fields that I don't need. So what I want to do is I want to keep the net value and only that one. So what I'm going to do here is also remove the month year of billing, because I don't want that. It's not that I don't need it, I don't want it in my ABC report, because my ABC report obviously is going to look at an overall aggregate period of time. However, you can obviously still keep that as a filter, because you may not want to load or base your ABC analysis on all of your historical data. Potentially just want to look at the last 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever it may be. So I'm going to get rid of the month year of billing, and we can now see that we just have the measures aggregated values. So as I said, I'll keep the net value, so I'm going to get rid of all of these columns that I don't want to have visible, that I don't need, and this is potentially where it might have been useful to create an analytical query where I would have removed all of those fields. Okay, so this is really my starting point. I have the net value aggregated for my sales organization. What I'm going to do is also add the product, because I'm going to be doing my analysis based on my materials that have been sold, and we now have the product that has been pulled in, as well as the discrete total invoiced value over the chosen period for my particular materials. One thing that is quite important is that we want the net value to be sorted from the greatest down to the lowest number. So we'll do a descending sort such that we have the highest at the top and the lowest down at the bottom. And we also have here the total of the invoiced values for all of the materials. Great. So the next thing that I want to do is I need to add a calculated column that is going to give me the portion that each individual invoiced amount contributes towards the total amount. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in my columns here, and I'm going to add a calculation. So it's going to be a calculated measure, and we'll call this revenue portion. So what we'll do here is we will go to percentage grand total, the inbuilt function percentage grand total, and I want at each line to have the percentage grand total of net value. So we're just going to say OK, and this should now update the revenue portion that each line contributes towards the total. So this is essentially telling me that for the material TG13, which had a total net value of $2,936, it represents 26.62% of the total amount of net invoiced values. So that's great. I can see how much each one of these items is contributing. So remember, the basis for the ABC analysis is that we want to segregate those materials that contribute the most to my net value, or at least break them down into that ABC class of most important, least important, and anything in between the two. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I need to add a running total. So I will add here a new column, and what we, oops, no, I didn't want to do that. So let me just remove that column, let me delete it. And what we are going to do here is we're going to add a calculation, which is going to be a cumulative sum. If it lets me, let's try that again. Add calculation, cumulative sum. Okay, so now it's added this cumulative sum. So what this is essentially telling us is, for example, line number 2, it's telling us that the addition of these two lines represents 45.223% of my sales. The addition of these three lines corresponds to 60% of my sales, which is going to be the basis for our ABC analysis. Now, maybe having it on so many decimals is a bit too much. So what we'll do is we'll go to cumulative sum. We're just going to change. We'll keep it at 2 decimals, so it's going to be a little bit more readable. Okay, so that's perfect. I'm just also going to maybe change the name of this, and we'll say revenue sum. That's perfect. Then the next thing we want to do is we want to add a column where we are going to indicate if this material has been determined to be an A, a B, or a C material. So again, for that we are going to add a column. And here we're going to manage the formula for it with the formula capabilities of Embedded SAC. So we are going to call this column ABC appropriately. And I'm just going to flip into the function mode. So we can see here the T, which tells us the text of that field is ABC. I'm going to click on it to flip it to the formula. And here we are going to use the inbuilt formula if, and the syntax of this condition is if, open parenthesis, the condition, comma, value if it's true, comma, value if it's false. So I'm going to say if, open the bracket, and what we want to do is we want to say that if this particular value is, let's say, less than 50%, then it's going to be an A item. So obviously we're still selected here in our formula, so I click on the column that I want to use for my condition. So it gets updated in my formula editor, and we're saying that if E1 is less than, I'm never sure if it's going to use 0.5 or 50. So let's try putting in 50 first, so 50%. I'm going to then comma. If it is that, we'll give the value A, and we're just testing out the formula here, so I'm just going to say X for anything else. And it's saying AAA, so this is not correct. So let me change the formula again. 0.5. There we go, that's better. So now it's updated the ABC column by based on the value of revenue sum, so the running sum that we've got. And if the revenue sum is less than 50%, then it's an A item. If it's anything else, it's going to be an X item, which obviously doesn't fulfill our need or our requirement for our ABC analysis. We want to have an A, a B, or a C, not an A or an X in our column. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to update our formula and replace the false value that we had here with an other if condition. So once again, we're going to say if, again, open the parenthesis, and it's going to be the same comparison that we're making here. So we're using again the revenue sum, and we're going to say revenue sum. This time, however, I'm going to say if it's let's say more than 90%, then the value is going to be a C, class C item, and anything else is going to be a B item. Let's update it again, and here we go. So we can see that we have those two items here that have been determined to be A items because they are less than 50%. We then have C items, which is everything above 90%, and anything in between is a B item. So this would be one way of doing the ABC analysis. Another way that you could possibly do it is by using thresholds, so a bit of a color coding to indicate that particular classification. So on the revenue sum, I'm just going to go and add a new threshold, and right off the bat I'm going to be adding a couple of additional ranges, and we're going to say that similar to what we had here, so anything between 0 and 0.5, so it's going to be my A items, and then from 0.5 through to 0.9, which is what we also had here, and then from 0.9 up to 1, I'm going to say apply, and this is then going to, as you can see here, update. So it hasn't updated the last one. Why would that be? Because it is so let's go and update the ranges on that threshold, and we're going to say if it's less than let's put it at 2 just to include it. Okay, so now we've also got our total, which is 100%. Okay, we'll leave it at that. But you get the gist that we now have replaced the ABC analysis with this color coding on the based on threshold. So again, we have green indicating that it's an A, the orange indicating it's a B class item, and the reds, which are C class items. So if we then flip into view mode, this is what the users would then get to see. So a nice ABC classification. If I did not mention it before, the really important thing here is that the net values need to be sorted in decreasing order, because obviously here when we calculate the cumulated sum, it has to make sense, because that will obviously be the key, the basis for doing our ABC analysis. So there you go. There you are. Hopefully this has given you some starting information on how you can add an ABC analysis to your embedded SAC stories, and I'm really looking forward to hearing how you will have applied these learnings. As usual, I hope this recording has been informative and you will find it useful in your adoption of SAP S/4HANA Cloud. Until next time, stay safe.